Now I'm going to show you a different way of playing. Kind of interesting right here. Black can play knight b4. And the idea is to hunt down this bishop. And in this position, black is down a pawn, but he has the two bishops, a nice center, and his record is 0 losses, 4 draws, and 9 wins. So that's one way to play. And also you can play, if c3, you can play knight d3 check, and you'll probably get the two bishops. So that's an interesting way to play it. There's another way you could play knight e7 and maybe play knight g6. And then if bishop takes knight, you open up your h file. And there's one funny line after knight e7 castle. It looks like white just loses a piece, but he almost has enough compensation here. And the idea here is to play bishop d7 and c6, so you can play this. And white's up a lot of development for his piece. I don't think it's quite enough, but it's actually not as easy as it looks to win this position for black. After knight e4, d5, white sometimes takes. And then after knight c3, queen a5 is probably the best. The idea is bishop g4, castles queenside, knight d4. You could also play queen c5. Sometimes what works really well in blitz, I know it's not the best line, but I have fun with it, is I come back to d7 and I fianchetto my queen bishop, and I had this monster bishop aiming at his king. Then I castle queenside and bishop d6, and a lot of times I can build up a pretty cool attack. Another line that I'd like to give a try to is bishop takes pawn check, knight takes knight, and now g5 wins a piece because g4 is unstoppable. So that's worth a try. Here's another fun line. And instead of playing bishop d6, knight b4. And now what happens if white just takes that? Well, we fork two pieces. And it looks like black has to be dead, but actually black's better. If he goes after our rook, then we counterattack and white's two rooks, and we're doing great. We're ready to castle queenside too. If c3, then knight c2 is no good because of g4, and we're going to lose that knight. But we could just play bishop e6, or even better, bishop d6. And if he takes this, we just castle. We can play bishop d6 here, knight e7 here, or knight b4 here. I think I like knight b4 the best, even though I've never played it before. Knight e7 I call any move like this a Renee opening. She used to put her bishops like this. And I think black can display slow like f6 maybe, or queen d6. I think black is okay. The line that bothers me is c3, sort of like a Kopek system. And just to look at one line, and I like white here because he's attacking e6, and also d3 might chip away at the center. So in general on move 7 I would prefer knight to b4. About 30 years ago I borrowed a book from the Denver Chess Club. I later returned it. It was a classic modern chess instructor by Steinitz. Beautiful book. It had a gold inlaid board on the front of a Paulson Morphy game. And it was before computers, just a world champion analyzing openings, advancing the cause of chess all by himself. And one line he looked at was castles. Knight takes knight, pawn takes knight. And now black is going to suffer for his pawn. He can play 8-6 or f6 or queen e7. And it's going to be contorted. You're going to have to try and hang on to your center pawn. It's going to be hard to develop. So if you don't like that, you can just give the pawn back like a Petrov with knight f6. Or you can give the pawn back like a Berlin defense with knight d6. So if white castles, it's a very complicated attack for a pawn. Or you could just give it back. That's up to you. Either way, you should be okay. Just to go over everything again real quick. After knight e4, the most common move is knight takes knight. Then after d5, bishop b3 is no good, bishop b5 is no good. A lot of times they'll play something like queen e2 or d3. Then I would just take the bishop as better than taking the knight. And if bishop d3, then I like knight b4. And probably the second most common move in practice would be bishop f7 check, which is terrible. Just take the piece and run around with your king. And probably the least popular, but the best move would be castles. And then you got to be careful.